Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us this evening for another Future Talk webinar presented by Future Nation School. Future Nation School aims to lead the African education revolution by providing a model of education that is futuristic, technology-enabled, and epitomizes excellence. We offer accessible, African-centered private education delivered through project-based learning. Tonight's topic of discussion is aimed at giving insight into the question, how can we create a model school for a richly diverse society? So what is that? What does it look like in the society that we exist in today? Just some guidance on the evening. So first, we'll start with the welcome introduction, which I'm doing now. Second up, we'll have a panel discussion with our panelists, and then we'll have a Q&A. If you have any questions or comments for our panelists, please post them in the chat box, and then we'll make sure to address them later on. To lead us this evening, I now hand over to Mr. Sizwe Nxasana, CEO and founder of Future Nation School.
Thank you very much, Tolo, and good evening to all our guests this evening at this Future Talk, which talks about a very, very important topic in the context of our country. My name is Sizwe Nxasana, as Tolo has indicated. I am the CEO and the founder of Future Nation Schools. We have two campuses at the moment, one in Lyndhurst and another one in Vryhof, which is just outside Soweto. The topic of discussion today is really important for a number of reasons. Since 1994, South Africa has made a lot of progress in a number of areas. But one area which continues to really affect us, sometimes very negatively as a people, is just how race continues to be a big issue. How we as a country have not changed the patterns that were created even during the apartheid era. So we continue to make progress in a number of spheres, but when you look at the education sphere, particularly, you find that structurally, in terms of the systems, the processes that we have in the system of education, are still largely based on how they looked like pre-1994. And this affects a lot of our young people in a number of respects, because what actually ends up happening is that there are biases that are so entrenched in the system of education that they determine what happens to a lot of our young people well after they've finished university, well after they've finished even colleges, when they start working and making a contribution in society as a people. So it is an important issue that we have to discuss, we have to find solutions on, and really see how we can move this country forward. Of course, schools are an indication of what happens in our communities, in our society, but schools can and must play a role in changing the stereotypes as well as the reality, the lived reality of a lot of our people in our communities. Because as we all know, things like hate, we all don't get born with hate in our hearts, but we are taught to hate someone who doesn't look like us. And schools play a very important role, obviously, in learning and teaching. So if we can teach people to hate and people to discriminate, it means we can also teach them not to hate, not to discriminate. And schools play a very important role, because if we can find a model through schools that can address some of these issues, we can have a much better society. And I was just busy with a project right now where the chances of success, if you are African, are really almost like 70% less in a particular profession that I will not name compared to your white counterparts. Just using race as a variable, simply because you went to a particular school, you went to a particular higher education institution. Some employers, in fact, are not even going to give you a job. They're only going to give people a job based on what they consider to be quality institutions that produce quality education. And therefore, and normally when you look at those institutions, they are largely white, they are largely untransformed, and it becomes a problem where in a country such as ours, Black is associated with low quality and white is associated with good quality, which, as we know, is actually not true. but it has become something that we've been made to believe that this is something that is so. And when you look at us as African people particularly, there's nothing in our DNA that makes us any less than any person. It doesn't matter whether you are Caucasian, you're white, or you're Asian, it doesn't really matter. All that matters is the kind of opportunities that we have. So the issue is, as a country, can we have equity and quality at the same time? Because I really think it is possible to have equity, in other words, to have an environment, especially in education, that gives a fair chance to every child, regardless of the racial background that they come from, a reasonable chance of success. Because if we continue with a situation where just because you are Black, you are considered to have less abilities, whether they're cognitive or intellectual abilities, is actually not true. It is not true. It is all about the opportunities that we give to our people. And this evening, I'm really pleased that we have a very, very good panel of speakers on topics that relate to education. And I'd like to, make an introduction of our speakers today, starting with Ma'am Johanna Makhubela. She's one of our parents, but not just being our parent, she's also a banker. She's a banker working for one of the private banks in the country, at RMB Private Bank. So she's going to, share with us her thoughts, especially around the role of parents in an environment where you have a racially diverse, society in a school or community in a school. And then we have Mr. Godwin Khosa, who is the founding member as well as the current CEO of the National Education Collaboration Trust. I have the privilege and pleasure to have worked with Godwin from when the NECT, the National Education Collaboration Trust, was created way back in 2013. And this is an initiative that brings together government to work with business, labor, civil society, and organized business in addressing the issues that confront us in the education system in the country. Before this, Godwin was the CEO of the Joint Education Trust, Education Services, which is a large, South African research and development non-NGO, and he serves in a number of, organizations, particularly those that are involved in research. He's worked for the Human Sciences Research Council, the Center for Education Policy Development, and he got his education at a number of institutions. So he's a very learned friend here who got his BEd from the University of the North, a postgraduate diploma in public and development management from Wits University, BA honors from UNISA, a master's in management from Wits, and currently he's reading for his PhD at the University of Sussex. So welcome, Godwin. And then last but not least is Ma'am Mpolanga, who is head of schools at Future Nation Schools, who's obviously going to talk about what goes on in learning and teaching in the classrooms. So Godwin is going to talk broadly about not just curriculum, not just about, because as we know, curriculum is much broader than the context of just what learning and teaching takes place in the classroom. It's a whole experience that people feel, especially students, feel when they're in the education environment. So we'll kick off and we'll start with Mr. Godwin Khosa. So the way that it's going to work, just if I can just explain the rules of how the proceedings of this future talk are going to work, is that each of the speakers is going to give us their inputs, which are going to be about 10-15 minutes each. So one after the other. We'll start with Mr. Khosa, followed by Mem Langa, and then Mem Johanna Makhubela. At the end of their presentation, in fact, as they speak, you are most welcome to use the chat function to post your questions. So that at the end of their inputs, we will then have a conversation as a panel, and at the same time deal with the questions that would have been posted on the chat. So thanks very much for that. And we should be done by 7 o'clock. So it's now 18:15, in other words, 6:15. And therefore, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Godwin Khoza. And when I switch my camera on, it means that, I'm asking you to wrap up, your talk and your presentation. So over to you, Godwin.
So thank you very much, Chairperson, of the session, Mr. Ngasana, and the Chairperson of the National Education Collaboration Trust. So, and thank you for inviting me to what I think is a very important, but also equally complex topic. That concerns us here in South Africa, but it's also a very relevant topic across the world, where people have to share, spaces, they have to share opportunities, they have to bring up, children, and they must find activity for them in the economy and in life, and in that manner. So, and let me just acknowledge my fellow panelists, Man Makuwe and Manlanga. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I thought that as all of us will reflect, ideas, I'll also just, contribute to the framework for thinking about inclusion. And I think that would help us, take us the conversation amongst ourselves. The chairperson has already alluded to the fact that, schools are used to prepare our young people to, firstly to, enjoy life, and secondly, to get ready for their adult life and participate in the economy and have fulfilled life in that manner. So the concept of inclusion, therefore, has to talk about how we take, kids throughout that whole process, including how they get to participate in life itself. So I'm going to organize my thoughts into almost four parts. The first one is, my main thesis, which is a claim that I'm making, and it's an informed claim that I'm making. Secondly, I want to talk about what I think are the complexities of dealing with inclusion at the right level. And thirdly, I want to suggest some responses on how we should respond to, the challenge of inclusion. And lastly, I'll make some conclusions on what I think in that respect. So the first, of course, I will want to talk about is, framing this concept and the practice of inclusion, and also just, reminding ourselves that it is a long, standing issue in society. It's an issue that we have dealt with along the lines of, the slaves and the masters, and who was included into what groups, and the struggles of the workers, which struggles actually have been driven by, big theorists such as Marxists, who always wanted to find space for the workers in the broader economy, for them to be included in the mainstream of the economy and life. So, and I think we here at home have done so much to sensitize ourselves about the importance of inclusion, and partly because of the history that we've had and the consciousness with which we have come into the democratic era. So there's lots of sensitivity. We've got quotas in workplaces, and we've got what I think are fairly strong policies that promote inclusion. But my main argument is that inclusion should be taken beyond just talking about accommodation. So accommodating some people into some space. How accommodation is necessary. We must actually measure how many people are accommodated in certain spaces and processes and so on. But I'm arguing that we must go beyond accommodation. We must we must go beyond just representation and say there's so many Black people, there's so many people of this ethnic group. And I want to introduce, Chair, another layer of complexity, because there are other social identities that we need to be accommodating or bringing into the whole discussion about inclusion. I mean, part of it is queer people, gay people, lesbian people. They are born, they go into the schools and so on. And I think we've got to bring them in the whole discussion about inclusion. So indeed, we must go beyond just counting how many learners fall into which categories, how many SGB members are Black, how many staff members are Black, and which sections of the curriculum actually deal with issues of inclusion. And I argue that we should actually take inclusion to include two important aspects. One is accessing opportunities to everyone, and particularly those who have been marginalized in the past. Two is to take seriously the politics of identity. So, and broadly, I mean, the politics of identity about seeing a reflection of myself in any system that I am part of, or any processes that I'm part of, any sports that I play, any classroom that I get into. So I must see a reflection of myself, or at least groupings that I belong to. So once we create institutions that don't reflect the people who participate, it creates problems, I argue. And I chose to start with a quotation from Fukuyama there, which I like very much. And he says, it is to be poor is to be invincible to your fellow human beings. And the indignity of invisibility is often worse than the lack of the resources itself. So this is how poverty actually puts certain people in worse, circumstances. So, and I've drawn a few, concerns about inclusion. And these are about doing away with humiliation of whatever kind based on race or sexual orientation or ethnic groups or region from which people come from, the indignity that comes with. Two, economic marginalization, whether people find opportunities to teach in a particular school or to teach certain subjects or to teach in a particular region, the disrespect that comes with it, and also the economic grievances that people carry. And people don't say this, but they carry it along every day. And added to that is what I call the new isms. And that has to do with the narrow experiences that people have gone through, narrow injustices and lived experience, and maybe whether it's queer people or those groupings that I have indicated. The opposite of that is what we're trying to do when we deal with inclusion. So addressing issues of dignity, which would include recognizing people, and it's recognizing each and every learner, each and every teacher, each and every SGB member for who they are and what they bring, and what they bring along, and it's got to do with self-esteem. I mean, it's enabling people to enjoy self-esteem. The second big category of those concerns is, of course, democracy, allowing people to participate in the economy and exercise agency. People have abilities, and often institutions don't allow them to exercise their abilities, to share political power. And lastly, restitution, which hangs around equity. So if certain people, certain groups of people have actually not been accommodated before, it is important that measures are put in place to bring them to par with other participants in those processes. So, I mean, to summarize what I think are the responses there, is that inclusion should be about full affirmation of inner identities, whether it's an SGB member, whether it's a learner, or whether it's a teacher. We have to actually make means for people as individuals to fulfill, to affirm their inner identities and to actualize themselves, which is often not the case. And that is actually caused by how we set up our institutions. But it's easier said than done, because having to deal with inclusion requires us to deal with all sorts of complexities. And I've summarized some of these. They will take long to discuss, but I'll just run through those. Some of these tensions that are there is that generally there's tensions between freedoms and equality. There's tensions between individual choices and common good. Individuals don't always are comfortable with the common good and what moral law, provides. That, the right to existence versus the depth of individuality, because we are different as people. The second, tension is the tension between liberalism, which also is about individualism, and the next you could consider is nationalism versus global cosmopolitanism. So we could see ourselves as nationals and be happy to take our kids to future nations who come from Zimbabwe, the people who come from, up in Africa, in other continents, must be ready to, accommodate as well as recognize those. Internationalism and culturalism, the chairman was talking about ethno-nationalism. So people part of a certain group and wanting to be, recognized, that sort of thing. But let me highlight the two complexities. Often we think that assimilation, in fact, we take assimilation as an easy way of dealing with, inclusion. And I argue it's not the way we should go about it. And the last part, and my time finishes, that's 10 minutes have gone. I'll just try and summarize. So the last actually complexities is absolutism. So, and the argument I'm making here is that dealing with inclusion actually is not about, swinging from one end to the other. It's always about finding a balance between, these tensions that I've spoken about. So how could we organize these responses? I think there are two big ways in which we could organize, these responses. One, it is important that when we think of inclusion, we ensure that there's conceptual completeness and comprehensiveness. So all those isms that we have spoken about, economic opportunities, as well as taking into account identities, which in the main is about the person, summarized in the whole concept of the thymos, the person himself and the judgment of self-worth, as well as group identities. The second bit is, of course, what we get to do through policies and laws, and I think we've got quite a fair number of that in this country, but linked to that is institutions. So making sure that the practices and the rules, not just the rules, but also the practices, actually accommodate and promote that recognition of individuals. In conclusion, I think institutions should first and foremost gear themselves to protect the marginalized. They should actually focus on developing integrated national identities. So in spite of the fact that we have subgroupings within, nations, we've got to find ways of developing integrated national identities, promotion of tolerance, and national sympathy. So sympathy is often, given a backseat, and it's not just national sympathy, it's sympathy as a human, kind of practice, even between individuals. And lastly, focusing on norms, values, and perspectives that our institutions carry. And lastly, I propose that the building blocks of inclusion are actually at an individual level. So even though we aggregate the reporting, even though we aggregate the way we actually think about policies and rules and practices, it should always be about each and every individual, because each one of us are different. And secondly, each one of us come from different subgroupings, whether it's ethnic or national or sexual orientation. But at the core of it is avoiding shame and anger. There's lots of shame and anger that individuals walk around with, and developing pride and patriotism in each and every individual. If we did that, we will be able to build, the kind of a nation we want to see, and the kind of institutions, and the institutions that should build the kind of nations that we want to see. So, Chairman, I hope that is useful, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks very much, Mr. Kosa, for your input. Already, the chat room is abuzz already with comments. We'll come back to those comments or questions, from your presentation, because it's generated quite a lot of discussion and thoughts, which we'll come back to. So it now is my pleasure to introduce, and I've already introduced her, but to welcome Ma'am Mampolanga to make her inputs. Over to you, Ma'am Langa.
Thank you, Caesar, and good evening. There's a belief that schools are a social space that reflect the inequalities that exist in society. And why there's this belief? Because people believe that students spend most of the time in schools. And it is true, they spend most of the time in schools. So if they spend so much time in schools, shouldn't we as schools be able to eliminate racism? That's a question that we need to ask ourselves. But we cannot answer those questions if we do not look at what is happening around the four walls of the school. What do we do in the classroom? I will start by indicating that the way we teach should be able to eliminate some of those injustices. What do I mean? There is a model that can be used called project-based learning. What is this project-based learning? Project-based learning, it is a model of teaching where you allow students to inquire, to investigate, to research, to do independent work, to self-explore and discover. By doing that, it allows them to start questioning things. Because what we normally do when we teach PBL, we would give them a question. And in that question, they need to come up with a solution to that problem. And as they do that, because it's a question, we're igniting their curiosity. By the way, every child is born curious. So by asking them questions that will force them to think beyond the four walls of the classroom, not only answers that come from the classroom or from the teachers. They start thinking differently. They start being curious, and they'll start questioning injustices that they see in the schools, their biases. They will even question their own identity or appreciate their identities. And even look at some of the dominant cultures in schools. You know, there are schools where you'll find that all of them are wearing the same blazers, be it hot or cold, the blazer must be in, it must be buttoned. That's a culture that's dominating the school. Isn't that supposed to be questioned? It can only be questioned if students are given an opportunity. And when they start questioning things, they start forming what we call non-transactional relationships. It's relationships there where students know I'm not going to benefit if I befriend that one. I'm going to benefit from this one because he comes or she comes with different ideas to the solution to the problem that we are solving. And that they also stop, clinging, like a cock drifting in the river. Nothing to say, you just follow the dominant culture. Be it a white culture, be it a black culture, you feel this is what everyone is doing, so I have to fit in and wear a new jacket. And the advantage with also this type of teaching is that once students have a voice, they feel included. I heard the previous speaker talk about inclusion. This is one way in which we can include our students. We can integrate ideas, be it from a dominant culture or a white culture. Once we integrate ideas, we're able to understand how people think and how people live. And it transforms both the students and the teachers about the world around and different perspectives about life. And it is also empowering. PBL encourages also authentic problem solving. When I say authentic, I'm referring to, we cannot be talking about things that students do not know. Some of our students come from rural areas. I like to give the example of a roller coaster. You give them a question based on a roller coaster. Most of the students don't even know what a roller coaster is. So in that case, you are not being authentic. By being authentic, it means you are trying to ask them or trying to find questions that are related to their lives. And students like that who are living with what they see, they'll start questioning, why is Fibonacci in mathematics getting credit for number patterns? But we've got Indebele number patterns that are happening in their designs. There is a lot of mathematics involved there, but there's no credit in that. But Fibonacci is in our mathematics books. Why isn't there any credit? Victoria Falls. Where were the native Zimbabweans and Zambians when Victoria Falls was discovered? How can we discover something that was there? Are we implying the African people were not there to see the Victoria Falls? You know, there are a lot of things like English. We always judge people's accent of speaking as a way of you're smarter. Why can't we be talking about different dialects in different languages rather than focusing on how best can we speak English or how best can we pronounce it? That's not being authentic, and it might be boring and make learning very passive. It's like that. And project-based learning encourages collaboration. And as they collaborate and work as a group, they will harness this collectivism. They'll stop thinking that I'm white, I'm dominant, I come from a rich family or whatever. And by doing that, the school, we should also encourage forums where students come in and challenge policies. There are policies and rules in schools that needs to be challenged, but we need to create forums that will allow students to do that. And we need to make sure that it's not only this collaboration that's happening amongst the students, even among the teachers. If I teach mathematics, I should be able to collaborate with a teacher who's teaching physics. By the way, teaching these subjects in silos was done long ago for industrialization, because people were taught that when you qualify, you'll be working in the maize field. This one will be working in the copper mines. And those were just, were separated type of knowledge. But now if we integrate our subject, work in collaboration, students will understand that knowledge should be integrated. Same applies to all other aspects of life. And the advantage with PBL is that we always reflect, we give feedback, we critique each other. Now, when you learn to reflect, it also makes you as a person to start looking and giving yourself a self-introspection of, is what I'm doing not hurting other people? But if I'm doing this, am I accommodating other people? Do I understand them better? So because you are used to be giving feedback and reflecting, it's easier to also do your own self-introspection. And you know, when you have such things, students or even teachers or the whole world will understand that respect in a white person is different from a respect in a Black person. You know, there are issues like in my culture, when I talk to an elderly person, we always face down, and it's a sign of respect. But with the other cultures, you must look me into the eyes. And to us, if you look at someone into the eyes, it's a sign of being rude. So those are some of the things that we need to reflect on. What do we mean when we say reflect? Is reflect a white-dominated type of respect, or is it a Black-related respect? When I come into the office and I found an elderly person, I sit down. That's how I was brought up. But in other cultures, you have to wait and be told to sit down. Is that respect, or is it respect that's one-sided? Insubordination. When we say somebody is insubordinate, do we consider their culture? Do we consider how they interpret insubordination? Polite. Am I polite if I speak softly? By the way, our language has a lot of dialects. We do ka mukoko, riyabua. We are loud as Africans, and that's not being polite. That's who we are, and that's how we are. And through critiquing and reflection, we're able to discuss all those things. And through PBL, you can manage diversity. Now, I'll give you, for example, there is a project that we gave our grade 7, I think that was 2-3 years ago, where they say, how can I create a safe space in my school? And these were grade 7s, but we were shocked when they coming out with how we can change our bathrooms and make them unisex Because if we start putting them as male and female, we're not accommodating other sectors of the population. They came out with people of the disabled. We had to change our spaces to accommodate all sides. And they were thinking how our board's supposed to be placed. But all of those things cannot be done if they were taught differently. They would even question like, why is the demography of the school the way it is? If you are in an environment where it is predominantly white and the Black teachers are the ones teaching isiZulu only, or the ones in the gardens, or the ones in the kitchen for tea, or maybe in the admin, students would start thinking that it means my profession in the future will not reach a point where I find a Black teacher teaching maths to the white students. So we should have a situation where students question such things, where they know that even if we are diverse, it doesn't mean we are different. The hairstyles, the hair, the food we eat, how we socialize. What is the meaning of beauty? Is beauty having a sharp nose and being slim? Those are things we need to think about. And when we talk about collaboration, does it mean power hoarding? Now that I'm Mampulang, I'm head of schools, it means people under me, their ideas are less important or they don't carry any weight. That's not diversity. So that can only be done if we apply that in the classroom. Students will understand what racism is all about, and they'll start tackling it in the classroom. And if they're able to tackle it in the classroom, it will be easy for us to go out there and educate our parents. The advantage with project-based learning is that when it's time to do exhibition, parents are always invited in the school, and that way they learn how we do things, and that can rub off to the community. Thank you, Sizwe.
Thanks very much, Mem Lange, for bringing this whole discussion to life in terms of practically, what we do and what can we do, and some of the examples and the stories that you shared are really, really powerful and very important. I'm now going to invite Mem Joanna Makubela. I know she experienced some problems with connectivity, but she is back with us. Let me just see. Mem Makubela, are you there? I know she dropped off and she came back. She was experiencing some problems with her connectivity. Mem Makubela, are you there? I can't see her now. Oh, I think technology is letting her.
Yeah, I'm not seeing her either, Babsize. I think we may have lost her for the evening.
Yeah, because she did lose connection and then she came back. We've lost her again. Anyway, just looking at the questions, really a lot of questions, and given that we have about 15 minutes left, I think let's continue. A lot of comments and questions in the chat, which is really, really good. Just then shows that this is a kind of topic that a lot of people want to engage with. So I'm going to hand over to you, to just help us navigate through the Q&A that we have. So over to you.
All right, thank you. So what I'll do is I'll just read questions either in summary or word by word, and then I'll pose them to each speaker. So just this first one, I think I can handle it. I think there may have been a bit of a misunderstanding. So it's speaking of white is of superior quality or Black being of inferior quality. Any thoughts on why the reforms in education that were adopted post-apartheid were collated as white paper on education? Was it justifying that white paper would imply fairness when paper in any case is white? So I think I'd just like to respond. So I'm not an expert at all, but what I do know is that the term white papers originates when government papers were coded by color to indicate distribution. So in other words, a white paper is for public access. So members of the public have access to white papers and things that are being discussed in Parliament or blue papers. I think it's an old colonial term though, so it isn't about superiority. So does anyone of the panel have anything to add to that at all?
Yeah, well, I think it, you know, the last comment that you made, that, you know, it is quite a colonial formation in terms of how commentary, especially on matters that may have been, you know, drafted as proposed policies, which may end up into laws, you know, were done. So, you know, in a lot of our system, especially if you look at, you know, just a lot of things in our government, how we are structured, has a lot to do with the colonial past. So there is something to be said about that. But you're quite right that, you know, white in this context is not about white as in the white race. And in fact, when you look at our constitution, the Bill of Rights, one thing that's really, really important, I mean, we all know we have one of the most progressive constitutions in the world. You know, the issue is we haven't really, you know, changed a lot of things in terms of the patterns of where we live, where we go to school, where we work, the ownership patterns in our country have not changed that much, even though obviously we all have the agency and the ability to vote, but that has not translated into a lot of the changes that we want to see as a peoples, that, you know, we are truly the majority in the country, and therefore economically and otherwise, you know, we can reflect that. So there is, what I'm saying is that there is some, you know, real issue in that question, if I just unpack it in terms of its underlying implications. But yeah, next question.
Sure.
I don't know if Godwin, you may want to, you know, share your thoughts, because I know you deal quite a lot with government policy and so on.
I'll just comment on it later on when we answer other questions.
Okay, good.
Sure. And then there's rather a comment here that I'd like a response on, and maybe Bob Koza, if I can bring you in on this. So the comment is, I think that at times we run the risk of not addressing deeper structural issues by framing issues in terms of racial and ethnic and cultural diversity as affirmative responses. If we want to really grapple with issues of inclusion and equity and justice, we need to foreground class as the deeper structural issue. Bob Koza, any thoughts and comments around that?
So that's an interesting observation. You know, I think class is really at the core of it, and even you know, race and other forms of identities will find, you know, representation or a congruence in class. So I mean, my main you know, argument is that, you know, institutions have to be designed in such a way that they protect the marginalized, and they recognize the needs of the marginalized, and create spaces where the marginalized of whatever background, you know, are brought to, they are brought to, you know, to the center of the processes. But you know, listening to Mampo, very interesting examples she's been giving, and in fact, typical examples that practitioners deal with on a day-to-day basis. And I just found myself getting to a conclusion about, or rather making observations about, the relationship between each learner and the learners around, you know, him or her, and the environment, well, I mean, and the institution and a set of values and so on. I think it's good, you know, to focus on policies and the provisions within institutions and so forth to increase or to improve inclusion. But more and more, I think that the kind of provisions that we make tend to forget or turn a blind eye towards individuals. Learners walk into schools, gates, and classrooms, and they engage with curriculum as individuals. I think it's important, to change, that thinking and try and empower each and every individual to gain confidence, pride in themselves, pride in their culture, pride in their ability. And I think if we do that within a context where the institution promotes, inclusion, we're highly likely to succeed, because a confident young man or girl or woman who has pride in her culture, in herself, in her individuality, should be able to reverse, a big part of those, isms and unfairness to them in institutions. So therefore, I think project-based, learning, tends to, should empower the individual for them to optimally utilize the environments they find themselves. And that environment would include other kids who they work with and the teachers and that sort of thing. Confidence, I think, is very important in building identities, and therefore in enabling individuals to navigate complex issues of inclusion. I saw some point about whether Black people should beg and so on. I don't think that Black people should beg, but I also think that we must change the narrative and we must change the perspective. I think it's more important to talk about Black excellence and building that confidence that Black kids can be excellent, and they operate as units in very complex racial environments. So we must build, that a confidence in each and every child that goes into the schools, and over and above that, create an environment that allows them to emerge as excellent, young people like any other young people from any other color. Thank you.
Sure.
Maybe just on that, if I may, because the issue really is in any environment, whether it is an environment which is based on social class or race or any other, social status, there's always a dominant culture and a culture which is maybe to use your words, Godwin, the marginalized culture in any environment. It's very rare that you find, for instance, an equitable structure in terms of race or gender or social class or any other definition, for that matter. And normally, those that are the culture which is not dominant often are expected to assimilate. In our country, you find that even in an environment where we are the majority, the defining culture may be quite foreign, maybe white, because we've been told a number of things as an African people, and sometimes you find this often, that we question ourselves, we're not confident about ourselves, and we want to emulate, and in fact sometimes even be more than what the white people or sort of Eurocentric people may be themselves, because this is what we've been, taught, and it's been inculcated in our culture and so on. So the question is, in a culture, for instance, if you just take Future Nation schools, yes, we have white teachers, we have white children, but the dominant culture is going to be defined based on who is the majority in a sense of our school. So the issue of assimilation becomes, quite an issue. And maybe to your point, in just supporting the point that you're making, Godwin, that if you are a white child, an Indian child, as an example, in our school, the issue is at a practical level, how do we make sure that you don't feel, of course, you're going to be having a lot more, Black children, in that school, but how to make sure that you can realize your full potential, you can build your own confidence, and you come and engage with learning and teaching as an individual, so that you have a reasonable and a very good chance to succeed. We're not going to give you special favors because you are white or you are Indian. You're going to be treated like everybody else, and you must, you have to, obviously, there are certain things like, what happens at break time? Who plays with you? If you're a child. And there are a lot of those dynamics that if you are confident as a child, you're going to go and join any group that you want to play with, as an example. So I'm just, translating what you're saying to practically, what does it mean, in the context of that environment. But obviously, I mean, a lot of these children would come with certain things that they are told at home. So, and often, maybe it applies to us as well, but, you're going to find that sometimes there's a tendency for them to exclude themselves. So if you're going to go and play African games or you're playing whatever, other children play, they sort of back off and maybe they don't want to participate because they feel, no, this is a bit foreign to them. So, I mean, it's a complex thing.
So, I mean, can I just, add and say, I think the sensitivity here is that what we get to reverse, we reverse in each and every young person. So if there's a perception that certain games are more, better because they are associated with certain cultures, it is reversed in each and every child's mind, even though it is reversed through institutional provisions and mechanisms and that sort of thing. And the point I'm making is that I think the most, sustainable way of reversing racism and those kind of isms, it's actually in building it in each and every child. So therefore, curriculum becomes very important, and it must seek to, build that, a capacity within each and every child. And secondly, the rest of the laws and the policies and the environment should encourage for each of these children to express their true selves.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. Tolu, back to you.
Agreed. So I have a comment here by Mupiwa that if Mupiwa doesn't mind, I'd actually like to also wrap it into a question, which I think is maybe even more important. So Mupiwa says, my input is that to create a better balancing beam is to absolutely come up with an education system that is directed at Black excellence. The starting point is even right here. We are debating in English. He follows it up to say, why can we not discuss in vernacular? So I think for me, just taking that comment and maybe even asking, the bigger question, because vernacular itself is many languages, it's not just one language. And so I guess my question, and Mampo, if you don't mind me bringing you in here, is what is the role of language in building a school in a racially diverse and inclusive society?
First of all, what we need to know that even if we are using English, we should not give English that symbolic power that it is a language that will take me far. Even if we are using it, we need to make the students aware that at the moment, this is the language we're using because all of us can speak that. So very important to highlight the importance that it doesn't mean if we use English, it is more important than Sisuthu or isiZulu. So at the moment, it's a means of communication. We can navigate all other subjects and talk with all other people because it is the language that we know. But this is something that we should be telling the students, how do you think we can improve that or we can change the situation? Because at the moment, the situation is like that, but what can we do? Because at the moment, English has this symbolic power. It is more powerful than the others, and it is not true. So conversations like that are very important at home and also at school. We should be able to talk isiZulu, Masisekaya. When we go to school, yes, we speak language. Then students will start realizing that, oh, we're using that because we are learning. But it's my language at home, my identity is still very important. So I would say having conversation about all of this is very, very, very key. And that, rather than trying to bring, all 11 languages in the classroom.
Yeah, but I just want to add to that, in that, this country has not really dealt with the language issue and the language policy in the language of learning and teaching, properly. I think we have to accept that. Because what happens is, in the foundation phase, schools, I mean, we have 11 official languages. So in foundation phase, schools are allowed to teach in any language, especially language that may be dominant in that area, including a lot of the indigenous languages. But the problem happens in the transition to the intermediate phase at grade 4. Suddenly, I mean, the policy of the country is that the language of learning and teaching from grade 4 is English. And English is not only used as English as a language itself, it's used for delivery and learning and teaching of all the other subjects, not unless you're in an Afrikaans environment. So in Afrikaans, I mean, there have been schools that are especially controlled by Afrikaners in their SGBs that, continue, that won, court cases right up to the Constitutional Court, that they're allowed to use Afrikaans as a language of learning and teaching. The point I'm making is, by the design of how our education system works, we actually relegate our indigenous languages. And in fact, even that transition, I mean, 80%, more than 80% of our schools in this country are taught by teachers who are not English first language speakers. So they're using a language which they themselves are not fluent in. And they're supposed to interpret very often complex and abstract, things, whether you're talking about the sciences and so on. And, if you look at the rest of the world, and this is a problem in Africa, by the way, because if you look at the rest of the world, the foundations, I mean, research is very clear in this, that if you embed your language, your mother tongue, in the earlier years, and you promote it, it's easier to understand abstract concepts later on, even as you switch to English or any other language. So we haven't really done that in this country. We haven't sorted that issue out. And by the way, it continues to be a problem until after people get into the world of work. The work that I was talking about earlier, in one of the professions that I've been doing a research and investigation on, you find that, people who are now, post-grad end up training as professionals, cannot write English, and communicate, in business writing properly. But that's a requirement, and you can't blame them because the way that language has been used, our languages have not really been developed. I mean, Afrikaners solved for this problem. They developed Afrikaans as a commercial language as well as a learning and teaching language, an academic language. We haven't really done that. So it's a big question, this issue of language, which we have to address if we're going to create better opportunities for our children, but also make sure that, we progress, the development and the promotion of our own indigenous languages, which is really important. I mean, we all understand the English is a language of business, but actually, when you think about it, whether you go to Asia or you go to Brazil or you go to, it doesn't matter where you go. Other nations are taught in their indigenous languages, and it's easy to actually transition to English later on when you're now in business. When you're Chinese, you learn English as you get into the world of work, and you've learned in Chinese all your life. It doesn't mean you have a less in your business and your business acumen. So I'm just saying it's a very big topic that we still as a country as a continent need to do something about.
And
Sure.
maybe, Caesar, just to add on that, is that what schools need to consider, especially in an English dominant school, that our students whose language is not English, when they write or they do the thinking, they start in their mother tongue and then translate before they even write anything. So it means they have to jump a few hurdles before they could come up with an answer to or a solution to any problem. So those are some things that need to be considered, that as we assess, do we consider that this is not their mother tongue? Because they cannot navigate any question or any answer as easily as someone whose mother tongue is English.
Can I bring another perspective? And I agree with the sentiments that are put across, but I think this challenge of language use and its promotion and growth and so on needs to go beyond schools and formal institutions. I think we need to also bring into the mix the household as an institution. So, because besides, over and above, English language being used as a as a language of learning and teaching and a language of communication. English language carries its own intelligences. In fact, each and any language carry its own intelligences and culture. So part of what we miss and lose in not using our language, and I mean deeply, language is deeply, it's we lose those intelligences. And it stretches from the home to formal institutions such as the school and places of work. So somebody like me, when I sit in a boardroom and things get so tough, I revert back to kind of cultural intelligences. There's idioms, there's all sorts of things. I bring them to the mix and they help me with my reasoning and they make me grounded. So the loss of ground that our kids experience is not only just in accessing what is presented in English language, it's also in how they've been removed or they don't have that a depth in their intelligences. So I think that's part of the debate that we must bring into the mix when we talk about language.
Sure. So I agree. I can see that we are just over our time. So maybe I can just invite the speakers to make closing comments, and then Babngasana, you can see us
maybe
off.
can if there's one or two questions, maybe take those and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, cool. No, if the speakers are still available, I'm more than keen. So there's a question here by Ulwandile. Says, most importantly, we need a way to get inclusivity to reach the home. Whatever non-inclusive discourse or ideology that children bring to school is usually taught at home. So how do we reach those, especially the elderly, in our homes as well?
Yeah, I mean, it is an issue. I mean, it goes back to the point that Godwin Kosa was making, that very often there are structural issues or things that we do at home that obviously children bring to the school. This is where I think the schools can play a role in actually educating not only the children but educating parents as well around issues of inclusion. Because as I was saying, I mean, hate and discrimination are things that are taught. We're not born with them. It's things that we emulate, we are trained in, we learn from our parents and that kind of thing. And schools can help to turn that, to change that, so that we start to influence families and homes in a different way in terms of how we think about inclusion. It's not easy, it's not going to be easy, but it's something that the schools must continue to do.
Cool. Any other comments on the speakers, or can I ask the last question?
Can I ask the last question?
Got you. So it's more of a comment. So this one says, we seem to be shy about issues of religion, and I don't understand why. I may not be religious, but raised in a Christian society, in as much as culture is given a platform, but people, and especially our kids, are shy to partake in cultural activities. Based on the majority of people in school, why not adopt a religion? Why not adopt a religion? Having checked people's religion on application forms for statistical purposes, I think we need to have one for the purposes of instilling discipline. So this is basically talking about religious inclusivity as well as religious specificity for, I suppose, Black schools or model schools in our society. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously there are schools that are based on Christianity, there are schools that are based on other religions, there are also secular schools. If I just take our schools as Future Nation schools as an example, we respect all religions, and we don't treat religion as kind of schools that we are agnostic to religion, but we embrace all different religions. So we have children that come from Christianity, that come from Muslim, faith that come from, other faiths. And the important thing is we recognize those and we celebrate them and we respect them, because, what this does is it promotes coexistence of different religions. Obviously, I mean, like for instance, I went to a Catholic school. If you are not Catholic, let alone, just being Christian, if you belong to another Christian faith, you are not allowed into our school. I mean, there are schools like that, but, obviously we are a very different kind of school, chain of schools at Future Nation Schools.
Cool. And then,
I was just gonna,
yeah, absolutely, come in.
The issue of religion is a complex one, and I just think that we need to look at it, slightly differently. In fact, we don't know where we're going with religion, given the changes in many of the religions. But recognition should be given to the importance that religion has played in development in the past centuries, and how it is going to continue to play that important role. Just to give an example, I mean, if you look at the role of religion has always closed the space where the state wasn't, had left gaps. So one of the areas where religion, for instance, has been able to close, which is important in human life, is psychosocial wellness. So we know that states across the world have not been able to deal with psychosocial, wellness of human beings. I mean, states have failed dismally. Psychologists have tried from a professional point of view. And, since the past, half a century or something like that, churches, for instance, have come and closed that space. And it's going to be a role that they will continue to play. I think one of the ways in which we could approach religion and the role of religion in education, it's actually bring a critical analysis of religion without influencing the kids about what they should, think about certain, religions. I mean, we have to equip our kids to critically think about religion. We'll save them from being taken for granted by those who actually are just going for commercial, endeavors. We'll save our kids from falling into the hands of extremists. And so I think that's one which institutions of learning should look at religion. Just a thought.
Heard. Ma'am, any thoughts on that? Just by way of just inclusion, in case you do have something to say.
Yeah, I think Gordon has covered everything. That it's something that we should start talking about and discuss in an open-minded way, so that it does not disadvantage those who believe, those who do not, who also believe. I'll give you an example. There's a topic on, is it life science, where it talks about Darwinism, evolution. And that topic, when you handle it in the classroom, you should be able to understand that some student would tell you that I need scientific proof that this is where we originated. And the other student will have a proof that they believe that we were created by God. So all those are different ideologies. And those different ideologies, when they come to school, you don't say you are right or you are wrong, but we allow them to share ideas, because the more we know is the more we get a broader perspective of what religion is all about. Why do people think the way they think, rather than criticizing them? So we're not shying away from it, but we know it is there, exists. But again, I always like to repeat, it's something we need to talk about all the time, openly, with open minds. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Mampo. And then there's I think this would be the last question, unless any new thoughts come. It says, I love the practicality that is being offered on how to create a model school in a racially diverse society. How do we bring the same education onto digital and social platforms as our children now, even adults, spend so much time looking at screens and being on social media? How do we make the school model extend to places that we actually spend most of our time in reference to digital space?
Tulo, you know, a digital space is part of the curriculum these days. The way we taught 20 years ago is completely different from the way we're teaching now. The kind of students that we're teaching are more digitized. So for them to enjoy and to have fun in the classroom, we should allow to bring those digital space in the classroom and use it so that they could see that it is possible for me to learn outside the four walls of the school, like I indicated earlier on, which is possible with PBL. Okay, thank you. I don't know if I've answered the question.
It sounded like you had some thoughts to add.
No, in fact, Mamlang has said what I wanted to say.
Okay. No, I mean, in that case, I think we've covered, you know, the gist of all the comments. Maybe just the last comment saying, thank you to the organizers and the presenters for such a thought-provoking discussion. I'm also sold on project-based learning, hoping to learn more about this. Language-specific and content delivery in a subject is a huge discussion to undertake for a broader debate. So any final thoughts from the panel? Apologies for my daughter in the back.
No, I just want to thank you know, all our guests this evening for joining us. Hopefully, you know, you found the discussion stimulating, interesting, and engaging. We really appreciate it. Also, we just want to thank our speakers, you know, Godwin Kosa, as well as Mampolanga for their inputs, and really apologize that you know, Mema Kubela, you know, had a problem. Obviously, sometimes technology lets us down, so we apologize that you couldn't, you know, share in her wisdom. You know, thanks very much, and have a good evening, and keep safe, and keep wearing those masks, and, you know, practicing social distancing and so on. Thank you. Thanks for attending.